Hello, sewing friends. I'm Katrina Walker, and welcome to my studio. Well, here in the Pacific Northwest, I know you're all everywhere, all over the world watching this, but here in the Pacific Northwest, it is now time for prom season and bridal season. And of course, what that means is lots and lots of really nasty fabric that needs to be hemmed so that the poor girl doesn't trip all over herself. So this is, of course, something that I've encountered with my own neighbors and things. So I thought I would reach out to you today and share with you 3 of my favorite easy hemming techniques for these fabrics. And of course, you can use them on any kind of, these are meant for lightweight fabrics. So, but those awful, sleazy, slinky acetates and the chiffons and organzas and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, so I hope you will find this enjoyable. Now, I'll be, of course, watching too up here on my monitor to see if you have any questions as we get going. So let's jump right in. So I'm sharing with you 3 of my favorites, and they get faster and easier as we go. So depending on how much time you have to actually accomplish this sewing task, maybe partly what determines your choice, but I hope you will practice and give every one of them a try because they really can be lifesavers. Okay, I've got to put my specs on because it's early here and I need some visual aids, right? Okay, so the very first one I'm going to teach you is more of a traditional bridal salon. This is how they do it. All right, so it starts with a fold, of course, because we have hems. So let me grab, and yes, there is actually educational materials with written instructions for how to do this step by step. So please download that, avail yourself. But for this first one, I realize I'm working with silk organza, so it's a little bit sheer, which that's how the fabrics are. They're sheer. So we need to start with a fold to begin with, and it just depends on how much you're turning up the hem. All right, so I'm just going to make myself a nice wide hem. Now, the fold that I'm making is going to be just a tiny bit, how do I say, a tiny bit longer than my finished hem. So the finished hem will be, maybe depending on how skinny I can make it, it'll be like an 1/8 of an inch or so shorter than what I'm actually doing the fold. Now, to create my fold, there's various tools you can use to do this. There's something we call a hair marker, which creases the fabric. That works really well. This is one that you can use on natural fibers, and this is called a fabric folding pin. This is made by my friends over at Clover, and it has water in it and a little bit of, their magic liquid, which smells kind of like rubbing alcohol. Anyhow, so when you draw on it, see there's now a damp line. It's actually also a damp line on my cotton background. So dampening the organza on that line allows you to go ahead and easily fold it on that line. So it's kind of a funny little gadget, but it works. But again, another tool I really like is called a Hera, H-E-R-A, Hera marker. So, of course, I'm going to give this a quick press. Now, I'm working with silk organza because that's what I happen to have on hand. I'm a silk specialist. I didn't have any nasty acetate fabrics, so I'm cheating. I'm using organza. But we start with a fold. So when you try the skirt on your person, try the skirt on your person, and you turn up the hem, at the length it needs to be. And that is what this would be. Now, bear with me if we have a storm here in the Pacific Northwest, so my screen flickered a couple times, so bear with us if the video we have any little glitches going on, but hopefully it's okay on your end. So what I'm going to do next, so I've created my fold, folded toward the wrong side. This is a regular hem. What I'm going to do next is then stitch very close to the edge of the fold. So as close as I'm comfortable sewing, I'm going to stitch to the edge of the fold. So let's take it to the sewing machine. I'm using red thread. Now, obviously, in your world, you would not be using red thread. You would use matching thread. Now, when I sew on these slimy materials, that's what a 4-H leader friend of mine, she would always call it slime, anything that wasn't a natural fiber. When I'm sewing on a lightweight fabric like this, there's a couple things you can do to help yourself to sew successfully. And one of them is to, number one, have a fresh, sharp needle in your machine. A fresh, sharp needle, preferably a microtex needle, works really well. The second thing I like to do is I like to take my needle and bobbin threads and I'll wrap them around my left index finger. And I do this because then when I start sewing, I have the ability to, I'm going to adjust this a little bit, but it gives me something to hang on to. So if, sorry, my hand was in the way there. So if, in spite of my fresh, sharp needle, if the fabric wants to go down into my feed dogs, I still have the ability to pull it out. So I try to stitch pretty close to the edge here. And when you first get started, it gives you something to hang on to help keep feeding the fabric straight into the sewing machine. Now I'm trying something new today to see if I can give you a better viewing angle. But it's making it a little bit more difficult for me to see where I'm stitching, so bear with me if it's not the most perfectly straight stitching you've ever seen. But I think it's a better view for you, and that's what matters. Okay, so even though I have a thread cutter on my machine, I'm going to go ahead and give myself some thread tails here. So pull some threads. So again, my next stitching stages, I'll have something to hang on to. I'll have my stitching. Or excuse me, have my thread. All right, so there's my first row. Now, something that we tend to do in home sewing world is that we have this unfortunate habit of cutting the hem right away. Like we'll turn up a hem and then go ahead and chop it off. Don't do that, okay? Leave the hem intact up to this point. So at this point, you try that skirt back on that person, their dress or their skirt. Try that back on your person. Double check that this is truly the length you want. Like I said, this is a method I was taught to do hemming, and a friend of mine who worked in bridal alteration says, oh yeah, that's how we do it. So again, you don't cut this fabric off, that hem allowance, until you've double checked the dress or skirt on your person, all right? So just don't get in a hurry to cut that off. But once you've sewn it, once you've double checked the length, then we can go ahead and we're going to trim off the excess. And so just get yourself a pair of nice, sharp applique scissors, or these are called snippies among other things, but I really like these. And go ahead and trim that real close to your previous stitching. Now, if your fabric is really loosely woven, like this organza has a reasonably tight weave structure. If you're working with a chiffon that has kind of a loose structure, you may want to use a shorter stitch length. I use just a standard 2.5 stitch length, but if your fabric is real loose, you may want to shorten your stitch length, or you can even use what they call a lightning stitch or a very, very narrow zigzag, and that will help hold things together. All right, now silk likes moisture. Now, the fabric folding pen only works on natural fibers. Okay, so if this was an acetate, it wouldn't do me. Well, it might work on acetate, but acetate doesn't like to get wet, so I would use my hair marker instead. But I'm just going to dampen my stitching line just to make it a little easier to turn this hem. Again, normally you'd be using matching thread, but I have to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So mine is not matching. Well, this is the wrong side of the fabric, so I'm going to turn my little bitty hem toward the wrong side. So the closer that you can stitch to the fold and the closer you trim, the narrower that hem will be. Doing this live on camera, I'm not aiming for, a 16th inch wide hem. If I can get 1/8 of an inch, I'll be really happy. But of course you'll want to give it a press. Because pressing is everything. Some people think it's sewing, but it's actually pressing. All right. So I've turned this toward the wrong side. And now my goal is to stitch right on top of my previous stitching. Whether I'll achieve that this morning or not, I don't know. But that's my goal. So let's take it to the machine. Again, I can grab those threads and the previous threads. And it just really helps if you have those threads intact. It helps you to line things up. Now, normally, of course, if it's a dress or skirt that's already created, it's going to be a circle, right? But it can still be helpful to have those threads to hang on to. Okay, so we'll start stitching. And yes, of course, normally I would backstitch, but I'm not going to for now. And I'm just going to focus on stacking up those stitching lines. Okay, so not too bad. There we go. So there's our little bitty hem. So it's been turned twice, stitched twice, or actually only turned once, but stitched twice. The trick really is that row of stitching right along the fold lets you achieve a very narrow hem very easily. Of course, I can't help myself. I have to press it again. Oh, we've had a comment about 4-H sewing. Absolutely. I'm a huge fan. Grew up in 4-H. And thank goodness for 4-H. It keeps keeping sewing alive. So if you're so inclined, please volunteer and help kids learn through 4-H. So where I grew up, it was just a normal thing. Everyone did it, But it's not as common for other parts of the country, sadly. But I was just going to give you another close-up view of this. Oops. What did I get in my fingernails? I don't know. Okay. So let me refocus camera here. There we go. Okay, so again, here's our little tiny little baby hem. Didn't always get my stitching right on top of each other. We'll pick a nicer looking spot. There we go. But again, you stitch along the fold, double check your hem length, then trim. If everything looks good, trim. Turn it one more time to hide those raw edges, and then restitch on top of your previous stitching. Okay, so that's kind of my tried and true normal way, that I would do hemming, and I really like it. It's because you can with practice create an extremely narrow hem, just a really beautiful looking hem, and especially of course if you're using matching thread. And actually, this is a good one for those of you who are really into thread. This is a good place to use those really fine silk threads because they really blend. The color blends with the fabric. Well, it's like it reflects the color of the fabric and it helps it to blend. And also when you press it, it really meshes in. So anyway, so that's a good place to pull out those fancy threads. All right. The next method I want to teach you for how to do a narrow hem or a specialty hem for specialty fabrics, that's the title of our presentation today, is using something called band roll waistband. So this is called band roll, and it's a waistband interfacing. And this is a hemming technique that I learned from a friend of mine, Dana Marie Bontrager. She's She's the lady behind the sewing place, thesewingplace.com. And she sells notions, among them band roll. But anyway, so band roll's interfacing, as I said, for waistbands, makes them very firm. But we're going to use it for hemming. So big thanks to Dana for teaching me how to do this. And she actually has a YouTube demonstration for it. Okay, so step number 1 is we're going to go ahead and you want to cut the band roll so the length of your fabric. And again, I realize the organza is a little hard to see. I'm going to cut this just a tiny bit longer. That's fine. But the band roll needs to be at least as long as your hem. Okay, so cut it to match. All right. Now what you're going to do, let's put this on the ultra close-up. So now what you're going to do is you're going to actually pull threads. This is the hard part. You pull threads from the band roll. So we're basically fraying this. So once you get it started, okay, how many threads do I have here? 1. It's like maybe 3 threads already, so let me just pull one at a time. 1. 2. 3. So it was 3. I'm not sure I can achieve 3 sewing on camera, so I'm going to go for 4. So the more threads you pull, the little bit wider your hem is going to be. All right, so this is why I'm counting out my threads. So this is stiff enough. You see how it makes almost kind of like a little comb here. That's the secret to this technique. So we're going to place the band roll on top of our organza, and we're going to place the band roll on the right side of our fabric. And again, remember that this is, I've already written the instructions out for you, and you can download those, courtesy of National Sewing Circle. So they've popped a box up on your screen. You can even take a picture of that with your phone. Anyhow, and you can get the link to download those materials. All right, so I'm going to line up the band roll with the edge of my organza, and the key is that I'm going to be stitching along the edge of this part that I've frayed. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'll be stitching right along the edge of the band roll. So again, my organza is placed so with the band roll. So this is on the right side of my fabric. To duck my head in here and just double check I'm lined up here. And actually, I'm going to change a foot to something that's easier to see. Remember, we have all these different sewing feet for a reason. Might give you a better view too. Okay. I like this open-toed foot for specialty sewing. There we go. One thing that's nice is this little toe comes out to the center needle position. So I'm just using a plain straight stitch, regular stitch length. I haven't changed any of those settings. I'm just going to put my needle down by hand to see if my placement is correct, and it is. So again, we want to stitch right along the edge of this. We've made this fringe, and we're going to stitch right along where it's not fringed. And I'm just going to take my time. So much easier with the right foot. I think this is called a sewing star foot. All right, now of course in real life I would have probably backstitched. So there's my organza stitched to my band roll. Let's put this on the super close up here. So see how I've stitched just right along the edge. Sorry, my fingernails are not very handsome today. All right, and so now we're going to take the band roll and we're going to roll it around to the wrong side. Okay, because we turn our hems to the wrong side. Oops, we're getting glary there. Let me see if we can find a better angle. So again, this is the front side of the fabric that the band roll has been stitched to. So now we're going to take the band roll and we're going to turn the fabric around the edge of the band roll. Okay. Now, let me see if I can get a better, not so glary angle here. That's a little bit better. Okay, so here we have the fabric wrapped around the band roll. Now, some people find it easier to stitch from the back side because then you can see the goal is there's now a little fold here. Here, let me just. Not sure why it's so glary this morning. Okay, so there's a fold here now where we've wrapped the fabric around the edge of the band roll. And so we want to be able to stitch right on that fold to secure this hem. Now, because the organza is sheer, I could actually stitch it from the right side because I can see the red thread. But normally we're not going to be using contrasting thread. There we go. We're not going to use contrasting thread. So I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to stitch right along that fold. Oops, let me get the thread out of the way. And make sure I'm actually stitching on the fold and not on the band roll. And you want to just make sure that you're keeping that fabric wrapped snugly around the edge of the band roll. Okay. So there we have, again, 2 rows of stitching here. Let's put us on the close-up again. So there's our second row of stitching. Now here's where the magic really happens, and I'm going to just raise this up a little bit, see if I can get a little less glare. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Refocus. Okay, there we go. So here we have our stitching. So again, we'd wrapped this around the band roll. So now we're just going to very carefully and gently pull the band roll out of our hem. It really is kind of a magical technique because it makes a really, really tiny little hem. So however many threads you choose to pull from the band roll, that of course determines the width of your hem. So just gently pull your hem off those teeth, basically, if you think of it like the teeth on a comb. So there, I've pulled my band roll free, and I've been asked before when I was demonstrating this if you could reuse the band roll, and I don't see why not. I don't see why you couldn't just keep your handy dandy little band roll. But remember, you do need to cut this to the length of the hem that you're creating. So I guess you'd want to have various lengths available to you depending on what it was you were hemming. But this is a really tiny little hem. And just super, super easy. Didn't have to do any trimming. So if you're in a situation where if you have some band roll, number one, and you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of hem to spare, maybe you had to let the hem down as much as possible. This is a good option because you don't have to take any extra fabric for the hem allowance. You're working right on the edge from the get-go. But maybe now you can appreciate a little bit more just how narrow that little hem really is. So that's the band roll hem. And again, my thanks to my friend Dana Marie for teaching it to me, because I'm always looking for new techniques, And so that's the band roll hem. Okay, I have one more hem to show you. The question's asked, which of these techniques work best for a curved hem such as on a flounce or circle skirt? And looks like that's from Sammy. And honestly, you can use any of these. So excellent question. Actually, I should have thought about that because I always get asked these questions when I'm demonstrating with a straight piece of fabric. The thing to remember when you're hemming a curved skirt, then what you want to do is basically, as you go, as you place your skirt, even though the skirt hem is technically a curve, basically you straighten out the curve along the band roll, or you straighten the curve. I would say that the method I demonstrated first, where you do the fold, might technically be the easiest for your flounce or your circle skirt, but you can do curves using the band roll technique. And again, the secret is to basically, as you stitch that first, you're going to walk in, basically pretend like it's a straight line, make it a straight line. If you're used to serging, you're used to kind of basically straightening out your seam. And with a lot of sewing, actually, you can basically straighten the seam as you go, so you're not trying to steer your fabric around in circles. It's actually easier to straighten the curve, and it'll look like a big mess off to the side, but as long as it's lying flat underneath your needles, you're good to go. So you can definitely use both for a curved hem as well. Probably the fold version is a little bit easier if you're not used to straightening curves, but you'll get used to it. In fact, actually, let me just cut a curve into this. And of course, the curve on a skirt, especially if it's a circle skirt, there's definitely a curve there, but it's not a super sharp curve. All right, and so again, what I would do is, now obviously the fabric's going to curve away from the band roll, but as you sew, just keep walking that curve into place. And yes, your fabric's going to wrinkle, it's going to do weird things outside of the hem area. Who cares? Okay, it doesn't really matter. Just ignore it. But you just keep walking that curve onto your straight line. Kind of like sewing princess seams. So I hope that answers your question. It's more just a technique thing, but you can definitely use either one. It's just easier and faster to demonstrate with a straight line on camera. Okay, so there's two. I have a third one that is the absolute fastest. And I just realized I meant to grab a sample to show you, but seeing is believing, right? And so this next technique I'm going to show you is basically a faux rolled hem. And you might be thinking this whole time, well, can't I just use a rolled hem on my serger? Of course you can. Absolutely you can. That's totally a fine way, a great way to hem. And actually, I like rolled hems on my serger, but I like even better. Look in your serger manuals about this. But there's actually a hem called a flat hem or narrow hem that your serger can perform. And it uses 3 threads, 3 or 2 threads, and you pull back the stitch finger just like you're going to do a rolled hem. But in this case, you don't adjust the tensions to make the fabric roll. You leave them flat. And that does a very, very, very nice flat, narrow hem. And that's the whole idea. And for a lot of things, I prefer a flat hem to the bulk of a rolled hem. Because with the rolled hem, because it rolls the fabric into the hem, it's kind of like, it has kind of that ropey kind of feel to it. And especially if you shorten the stitch length like it's recommended, and it's really thread covered, it's a nice look, but it's not always a look I'm going for. Now you can always lengthen the stitch length, and that makes it a little less bulky. But still, absolutely you can use a serger, but my favorite serger narrow hem is the flat hem or narrow hem rather than necessarily a rolled hem. Okay, so just FYI. Sergers are completely okay too. But this is for, you know, those who just, maybe you don't have time to set up your serger. Maybe your serger is getting its annual spa visit to the sewing dealer. Anyhow, so these are ways to do it. So this next one is a faux rolled hem. And all it takes is the ability to zigzag with your sewing machine. Okay, so it uses a zigzag stitch and sometimes thread tension to go ahead and create a rolled hem effect, but on your sewing machine. So let's actually look at how to set this up on the sewing machine. Now, this particular stitch is, how do I want to say this? It's not when you want to just go ahead and start stitching, in the sense that you want to go ahead and do some practice hems with it on some scrap fabric. So save some scrap fabric from your project if you can, and do some practicing with it. Okay, so for this stitch, you want to choose a zigzag. And I'm just going to choose a basic zigzag stitch here. So a zigzag stitch. Now, I mean, you could choose, there's also some machines will have a satin stitch or others, but we're just going to choose a regular stitch. So this is a regular zigzag. Now, we want to shorten up the length a bit. So I'm going to shorten it to 2.0. And again, on your machine, you want to practice and play with it a little bit. All right, and so, you know, you may choose to do something completely different and just try different zigzags and try different lengths and different widths. So for width, I like to make it fairly wide. Now, another thing I can do is I can go into Stitch Edit, and let's see, it's down at the bottom of my screen. And I can also play around with, in this case, I have thread metering, but I can play around with tension and change the tension. And if I want to just crank up the tension, sometimes that will make a better rolled hem, is to actually increase the tension, your stitch tension on your machine as well. So there's more than one way, more than one adjustment that you can make. So again, this is one to play with a little bit if you're going to choose to use this. But again, this is the faux rolled hem. So we take our fabric, and the way this works, I'm going to make sure I can grab those threads. But the way this works is that we want our fabric to be basically centered on the machine. So not off to the left or right, but centered. So in this case, I'm going to line it up with this little toe. Because the way this particular technique works is that if I turn my hand wheel, as you can see, it's going to zig into the fabric on one side and zag off the fabric on the other. And your thread tension is what is going to cause this to roll. Now this works best with crisp fabrics. So it doesn't work quite as well on chiffon as it does on organza, but it can work on a lot of really great fabrics. Cotton batiks actually work really well for this. I've even used it on silk dupioni. There's a lot of specialty fabrics. It's worth a try if you're in a hurry. If I'm in a hurry, this is my go-to because there is nothing faster. So again, we've set this for a short, wide zigzag. This is all in your instructions, remember, that you can download. Short, wide zigzag, and we want to center our fabric so that we zig onto the fabric on one side and zag off the fabric on the other. All right, and then we just sew. I'll slow it down a bit. I don't think the camera can keep up with full speed. Alrighty. And there we go. The fastest, easiest rolled hem you'll ever do without a serger. I'll show you on my close-up. Super, super easy. And see what a beautiful, tiny little rolled hem that did on this organza. And again, this is great for, you can use it on any kind of lightweight, crisp fabric. You can use it on a softer fabric, but I just find you get the best results on one that's quite crisp, like this organza. And again, with this particular technique, you can always play around with it. You can play around with the width, the length, play around with different threads, because it can be quite decorative as well. So super easy. Doesn't get much faster and easier than that. All right, so those are the 3 techniques that I wanted to share with you to make all of your specialty hems so much easier, because it's always, oh, some of those fabrics are just so nasty to sew with. And because it's usually on a finished garment, we don't always have the opportunity to say, you know, starch it or do any of the tricks that I like to use to tame fabric. You have to work with what you have. And so whether you use the traditional method where you do create a fold and stitch along the fold, or whether you're using band roll or you're doing the quick and dirty faux rolled hem, any of those will work and can definitely help in a pinch. So I'll just give you a moment to see if there are any other questions or comments, questions you might have about these techniques. So go ahead and Max will pass along any questions you have. Take a little swig of coffee there. Okay, question was asked, do you ever use, oops, I better put my specs back on here. Do you ever use a spray stiffener to make it easier to handle floppier shears like crepe de chine? Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of, frankly, starching anything that doesn't behave. You can use, and there are products on the market like Best Press is one that's real common here in the United States. And it doesn't stiffen as much as starch, but it does help give it a little bit more body. And so that definitely can help. So yes, absolutely. The challenge is that some of these, you need to test first. And again, you know, with these are, working with these types of fabrics, you know, if it's silk or say cotton batiste or a handkerchief weight linen or something, you have a lot more leeway. There's a lot more things you can do with it, right? But if it's an acetate, if it's, you know, a poly, if it's some of them don't respond so well to being sprayed, especially like the acetates and things. Those, but you know, what do they make cheap prom dresses out of? You know, of course they're going to use those fabrics because they're inexpensive. So so yeah, absolutely, Sammy. We definitely, I am a huge fan of taming my fabric, but But again, you'll want to test first because some fabrics play nicely with it and some don't. But for actually stiffening fabrics to work with, if it's something that I can wash, then I'm happy to use, like say, a heavy-duty spray starch. But those lighter products like Best Press, well, it can help a little bit at least. Anything helps, right? Anything helps. Okay, any other questions? I love questions because you just never know. There might be something I forgot to mention, and you're always really great about asking a question that fits the bill. So I'll just give you a moment to see. Working with scary fabrics is pretty much my specialty, so I love to find ways to make it easier for all of you, because my ultimate goal, of course, is to help you all to sew what you want to sew, right? I don't care what it is, just to help you sew what you want to sew and do it with as little stress as possible. Okay, I don't think I have any other questions. So that being so, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. I hope you downloaded the materials so that you have the instructions written out for you. And of course, this video is online and you can always access it there as well. But thank you again. And from Spokane, Washington, just like to say happy sewing.